Hello everyone. We're going to do some work with Git and Bitbucket in this video, and I want you to follow along with all these steps with me. Hopefully you won't get too confused because I'm going to be throwing some curveballs at you a little bit. But there are a few things you need to have done before you start watching this video. First, you have to have an account set up with Bitbucket. So I'm here at the Bitbucket website right now. So you'll have had to signed up, and this is my home page. Now yours is going to look different because I've already got a whole bunch of repositories that I've been using in Bitbucket. You're not going to have any of these over here on the right. So that's one thing you need to have ready to go. And the other thing that you need to have is you need to have installed Git Bash. So remember, Git Bash is the command line tool that we use to do all of our commands so that when we're working with our repository. And hopefully you were able to follow along with the instructions I gave you for that. So those are the two prerequisites to this video. And I suppose there's one more thing. We should have already talked about a little bit about Git, what it is, and why we use it as developers. So you should have a little bit of information about Git at this point, but not too much. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create our first repository in Git. So what we want to do here is we want to click the plus sign here and choose create a new repository, and we'll just call it test repository or test project, I guess. And just give it that name, test-project, and then you can leave all this other stuff as the defaults, and then go ahead and click create repository. And now we've got a repository on Bitbucket, but we don't have it copied down to our local computer yet. We'll do that in just a second. The next thing, now every repository should have a README file, so we can create that right on Bitbucket here. So let's go ahead and create a README file here. And now this is showing us what the code looks like. This is called Markdown language, and we don't need to worry about another language right now. We got our hands full with all the languages. But what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go to line 1 here. This is the README file, and I'm going to change it. I'm going to leave the hash, the pound signs that are there, and call it my test project. So, and that's all I'm going to do for this file right now. And then I'm going to press the commit button. And when we do a commit, we have to write a commit message, and it's already defaulting the message. It's saying README created online with Bitbucket. I'll go ahead and click commit right there. Okay, now here is actually where the README file shows up. So remember, I typed in my project. So the README file shows up on the home page for the repository. We don't need to worry about that too much, but it's a good practice to create README files, and when people come and look at your repository, this will be kind of like the introductory information and any special information that somebody needs to know about your repository. Okay, so I've got a brand new repository set up on Bitbucket, but I don't have it on my local computer at this point. So what I want you to do here is on the home page for our repository, you'll see this URL. Now, there's two different protocols you can use for Git. One is SSH and the other is HTTPS. Make sure, for our purposes, we're just going to use HTTPS. So make sure that this drop down is pointing to HTTPS, is set to HTTPS, and that's a slightly different URL. So we'll get. Sorry about that. That was a phone call coming in from my wife. I had to take it. Okay, so where were we? What we want to do is we want to copy this repository down to our local computer. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that this drop down is set to HTTPS, and then I'm going to copy this URL here. So I'll go ahead and copy that. And now what I want you to do is let's just set up a folder on our desktop for this, for practicing. So let's just say we keep all of our Bitbucket repos in a folder somewhere on our computer. In this case, it'll be our desktop. So I'm going to create a new folder and call it Bitbucket, or I'll just call it repos. Okay. And then what I want to do is on that repos folder, so this would be the folder that has all my projects, all my repositories. Now a lot of times what we're going to do is these repositories are going to be in our htdocs directory, depending on what we're working on at the time, but for now we can just set it up on our desktop. So I can right click on that folder, and depending on how you install Git Bash, hopefully you enabled this feature, but you should see when you right click, you should see these two Git items right here. We want to do Git Bash here. So that's kind of a nice little feature because it saves us from having to open Git Bash and then cd or change directories all the way to our repositories folder. So you can see right away once we open it, it's already navigated to our repos folder, which is where we want it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do our first git command. So, and that's going to be git space clone. So what that's going to do, it's going to copy the repository down. So I do git space clone, and then I'm going to paste in that URL that I just copied. So I'll do a paste, and then I'm going to right click and choose paste. So that's the command that we want. Git space clone space our URL to our repository. And what that'll do is that'll copy that repository down to our local machine. So once I hit enter, you may have to enter a password, your Bitbucket password. Maybe you don't, I'm not sure, but just be prepared to do that if you need to. Okay, now I'm going to switch back over to Windows Explorer here, and you'll see, whoops, sorry, fumbling a little bit. In my repos folder, you'll see here's a new folder. Here's our test project repository. And you can see here's that README file that we created on Bitbucket, and there's this other file too. Now you may not see this depending on how you have Windows Explorer set up. You have to be showing hidden files in order to see this, but and to do that you would go to, where is it here, View, and I have this checked, hidden items. So if I get rid of that, you can see that we don't see that little folder there, but I'm going to check it again. And right here, now you never want to play with this folder. It's called .git. That is our repository. That's where all of the changes are being tracked to all of our files. So don't touch it. But anyways, so yeah, that is actually the folder that contains all the information for our repository. All right, so we're all set up and ready to go. We created the repository on Bitbucket, and then we cloned it down to our local machine. So there's actually two copies of our repository, one on our local machine, one on Bitbucket, and we're ready to start working. Now we want to keep these two copies synced, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute here. But first I want to show you how to work with your files. Let's say this is a website. So I'm going to right click on this and do new text document, and I'm just going to make a file called index.html. So I'll go index.html here. I do want to change that file extension here, and then I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Sublime Text. So it's an empty file. I'll do what I'm going to do. I cleared that out. I'm going to use the snippets in Sublime Text. Remember those from web programming. So I'll type in new HTML, and that will start an HTML file for me, and that's good enough for now. It doesn't really matter what's in this file. It doesn't even have to be an HTML file, to tell you the truth. I'm just using that for an example. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save that. And okay, so for my project, I've created an index.html file. So I've added this to my project, and I'm ready to start tracking it in Git. So in order to track a file, there's a few things you have to do. So I'm going to go back over to Git Bash here. So I showed you the git clone command, and that copies the repository down. Here's the second command. It's called git status. So if you type in git space status, it will show you, whoops, I'm not in look at where I'm at. I'm in my repos folder. I'm not actually in my test project folder. So what I want to do here is cd into my test project folder like that, and then let me just do an ls real quick here so you can see it's got two files in here, and our index.html and our readme file that we created on Bitbucket. Okay, so once I'm inside of my test project folder, I can do git space status. So what that'll show us here are the files that have changed since we did a commit. So you can see this in red right here, and that means that it's not being tracked by Git yet. So in order to track this file, we need to do two things. We need to add it to what we call staging, and then we need to commit it. So let's say I added a whole bunch of files, and then I wanted to commit them, but I wanted to commit them separately. How it works is only the files that have been added are the ones that go in with the next commit. So what I want to do here is I'm going to do git add, and I'm going to add index.html like that. So, and now if I do git status again, you'll see that it's green. So what that means is by doing the add, I'm adding it to what we call the staging area. And how it works is you add files to the staging area, and then they'll show up in green here when you do the git status. And then all the files that are in the staging area will be committed when you do your next commit. So this is a concept that kind of tripped me up when I was first learning Git, but there's this concept of a staging area. So all the files that have been added to the staging area will be included in the next commit. So right now we've just got index.html in there, and I'm ready to commit it. And once I commit it, then Git will start tracking the file. So I'll do git space commit, and every time you do a commit you have to add a message. And to add a message I type in -m, and then inside of double quotes I type in my message. So I'll just type in added index.html. Okay. Alright, now at this point I've got index.html is in my repository and being tracked on my local machine, but it hasn't been synced up to Bitbucket yet. So let me show you something. If I go back to Bitbucket here and I click on the source link here, you'll see that the only file in my repository is that README file. But on my local copy, I have index.html. That's being tracked in Git here. So what I need to do to sync these two, if I want to sync from my local repository to Bitbucket, I do what we call a push. So I'm going to go to git bash here and do git space push, and then origin, and then master. Now we'll talk about this more in the future, but just remember that when you want to push, for now at least, you'll do git push origin master. Okay, so I'll hit enter there, and you may have to enter your password. You may not. That is your Bitbucket password. But now once I've done that, I'm going to go back over to Bitbucket here and click on this source link, and you should see now my index.html file is synced up to Bitbucket. So that's one of the tricks to using Git and Bitbucket, is that you have to keep your various copies of your repository all in sync. And it can get to be kind of messy if you're working on lots of different computers, because you've got a lot of copies of your repository. Okay, so I could go ahead and every time I make changes to index.html, I could do a git add and then a git commit, and every time I do that, each version of this file will be tracked in Git, and if we ever needed to roll back to a previous version, which can happen at times, it's real easy to do. Alright, let's see. Let's go ahead and make a change to index.html here. I'm going to, so I've got index.html open in Sublime Text. So I'm just going to add a title, Hello World. I'm going to save it. Okay, now I've made changes to my code. So if I go over to Git here, now normally I'm just making real trivial changes to the source code. Normally you're actually working on fixing things or adding new features and stuff. But if I go back to Git Bash here and I do a git status, you'll see that index.html shows up in red here, meaning that I've made changes to it, but I haven't staged it yet. So remember, you have to stage or add. The command is git add, but we say we add it to the staging area. You have to stage a file before it can be committed. So at this point, I'll do git add, and I'll type in index.html like that, and now it's added. And then the next thing I need to do is commit it. So that's git space commit space -m, and then inside of double quotes my message. So I'll just say added title to the page. Okay, so now that change has been tracked on our local repository, but it hasn't been synced to Bitbucket yet. So I'll do git push origin master, and that will make sure that that commit gets synced up to Bitbucket. And sure enough, if I go back over to Bitbucket here and I look at my commits, click on the commits, you can see that it got the latest commit. Now this is what's known as the log. This is the log of all of our commits, and it's really important to create good messages for your commits, because a lot of times you look through this log to see, oh, where was it that I made this change that I want to go back to now. So a lot of times you can browse through the messages to find what you're looking for. There's other ways to find what commits you made changes, what changes were made during what commits, but this is the easiest one, is to just look at the messages. And I want to show you something here. If I click on, here's the ID for the commit. Every commit gets its own ID. If I click on that link here, it will show me what's changed here. So on this commit, we can see that this line changed here. There's the minus sign here, so that was removed, and then the plus sign shows that that was what was added. So basically, so you can look at the changes that were made on a commit, which can be really handy at times when you want to see what other programmers have done. You can look at the individual lines that have been changed. Okay, we just we just looked at the commit log on Bitbucket, but I want to show you that we can also look at it in Git Bash too. So the command for that is just git space log, and then by doing that, it should show me all the commits that I made, and these are in reverse order, so the newest ones are first. So you can see that the last commit that I did was I added a title to our web page. And then before that was the commit where I actually created the index.html file. And then the first commit that we did, we actually did this commit on Bitbucket where we created the README file. And remember, the README file is just kind of an overview of the project, and it's displayed on the repository's homepage on Bitbucket. There is one final thing that we'll need to go over with Git and Bitbucket, and that is, I mean, before we get into some of the more complicated features of Git, but what we'll need to do is show you how to work with a repository when you're working on multiple computers. A lot of times, you know, in our case for our class, you'll be using the school computer to do some work on your projects, and then you'll most likely be using your home computer too. Well, that gets a little bit hairy because in that case, we'd have 3 copies of our repository. We'd have one on Bitbucket, that's the origin repository we say, and then we've also got one on our home computer and one on our school computer. And the reason why that gets to be a little more complicated is that we have 3 copies of the repository that all need to stay in sync. And remember that to sync your local repository to the origin, which is Bitbucket, you need to do a git push. Well, if I were to work on the project at school and then push the changes up to Bitbucket. Then when I go home, I would assumably have the repository cloned already, but what I would need to do when I go home is to do a pull. And what that would do, so the command would be git pull origin master. And what that would do, that would take all the files from Bitbucket, that's our origin repository, and it would it would sync all the changes to our home computer. So that's one thing you got to be careful that you don't forget to do your pushes and your pulls, because if you're working at school and you forget to push your changes when you're done, then when you go home and you do a git pull origin master, then you're not going to get the changes that you made at school. So you got to remember, just always remember that you do a git push when you're done working on your files, and when you sit down and start working, do a git pull, and you should be okay. If you forget some of those steps, then you're going to run into merge conflicts, which we'll have to talk about later. All right, I think that's all you need to know just to get started with Git. All right.